In late June, our next guest, Kyle Plank, started to feel a little bit under the weather. He had a fever, he had a headache, he had some chills. At first, he thought it might be COVID, but in the back of Kyle's mind, he wondered if it was actually something else. And that's because Kyle is a PhD candidate in pharmacology who studies infectious diseases. He was following the news of monkeypox outbreaks happening all across Europe. And pretty soon after the onset of his first symptoms, his suspicions were realized. Once his fever broke, spots began to appear on his hands and fingers before spreading all over his body. And then came the pain. The pain was so intense, he would spend the entire day in the bathtub just for a little bit of relief. And more relief finally came once Kyle was prescribed the drug TPOXX. But as Kyle's about to share, his path to getting TPOXX was anything but simple. And even as a researcher working in the field of infectious diseases with all of the right connections and resources, he still struggled to get the treatment he needed. Joining us now is Kyle Plank, a pharmacology PhD candidate who has thankfully recovered from monkeypox. So Kyle, first off, thank you so much for being here.
And thanks for having me, Zerlina. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you again. Tell us about your experience. Do you know how you got monkeypox? Tell us more about how you think you contracted it.
Yeah, so I took part in a lot of Pride festivities in New York City at the end of June, celebrating LGBTQ plus Pride, and there were a lot of close quarters and parties and things like that. So I'm pretty sure that that's where I picked it up.
Do you think that someone without your background would be able to figure out what was going on? I mean, when your symptoms first started, without your background, do you think you would even have thought of monkeypox as a possibility?
Honestly, not really, because at that point, it wasn't really being covered in the news a ton. It was there a little bit, but I think it was kind of the furthest thing from most people's minds. And so I was really grateful that I was able to reason through that. But I think now it's a little bit more common and it's in the news. People know to think about it. But back then at the end of June, it was still pretty rare.
As we mentioned, you have all the connections you could possibly have in sort of first understanding what's going on, but also knowing who to ask to get treatment. But you still had trouble getting the TPOXX. What were the obstacles in your way in order to get the treatment you needed?
Yeah, so part of it is, with monkeypox, you're supposed to be isolating because you're contagious. You're not supposed to be going out in public. So back at the very beginning of July, when I was getting tested for monkeypox, I actually had to go into the hospital and in order to get tested. And so that required me to go out in public, and I had to cover myself up, even though it was really hot and things like that. And then once I got there, even though my doctors were able to advocate for me to get tested, they still had to do a ton of paperwork, hours worth of paperwork to fill out the IND protocol for me to get access to TPOXX because my case qualified for it. So even though I had all the connections and I was really lucky to get the care that I did, I still was in pain for about a week before I was able to start on the drug.
Oh, wow. Last question in the last minute here is, how do you recommend other folks stay vigilant and keep themselves safe knowing what you know?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of really great information out there, including the CDC website, which has been recently updated and not only has information about symptoms, but also how to get TPOXX. So if you are experiencing any of the symptoms of monkeypox that you can see on the list, it's good to stay home and isolate yourself until you're feeling better or until you're able to get into a doctor to get tested. Testing is a lot more widespread now, thankfully. And if you do end up having a suspected case of monkeypox, there are steps that you can go through to get TPOXX, and those are outlined from the CDC.